Hello and welcome to the GreenPilled Network podcast. If you're just joining us, we're building a coordination, a network society of thousands of hackers, streamers, and tours focused on using crypto to bring positive sum digital systems to the world. This podcast features the people who are doing it. And if you want to learn more, you can visit our website at GreenPilled.network, where you can download the GreenPilled book for free, join the Discord, or become a member of your local GreenPilled.network chapter. Now on with the show. All right, this is part 2 of my special series with Vitalik Buterin about public goods funding at the end of 2025. In part 1, we talked about Vitalik's broad view of the design space as we go from 2024 to 2025. What are the things that builders should be focused on? And in part 2 of this 2-episode series, we talk about deepfunding.org, which is a new experiment that the Gitcoin ecosystem is building with Vitalik's guidance. I should say the Gitcoin and general public goods funding ecosystem is building. There's a bunch of us who are building part of this ecosystem. And the amazing thing is the money Legos that have been produced that allows a bunch of teams to work together to implement Vitalik's vision. So in this episode, we talk about Vitalik's vision for deep funding. And a TLDR for you before you get into the episode is that deep funding uses dependency graph in a market of AI or human allocators steered by a spot checking jury to pay a large number of open source contributors directly or indirectly upstream of a project or outcome that a funder cares about. Okay, so we're doing deep funding, no more of this surface level funding that only if people know about it does it get funding. We're looking at dependency graphs. We're using AI agents in order to figure out which projects have dependencies in what ways on other things. So this is a really bold experiment in public goods funding. I'm so excited to be unveiling it today on the Green Pill podcast. So the next voice you will hear will be myself introducing Devansh and Tejal as my co-hosts for the episode, and then we will get to the conversation with Vitalik about deepfunding.org. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. All right, here we are. Devansh, you want to start off with an intro of yourself, and then Tejal, and then we will get into our questions for Vitalik.
Thanks for getting me on this. My name is Devansh and I work in Arbitrum DAO governance and in general DAO governance and also public goods. And I was an investigative reporter by training, and I think like the values of censorship resistance, speaking truth to power really have a home in the blockchain space. So that's what got me into it first.
Thanks, Devansh. Go ahead, Tejal.
Hi, I'm Sejal, and I work as Grants Innovation Specialist at Gitcoin. My work really involves in sort of designing the grant programs with the ecosystems, and I led the first EasyRPGF pilot with Gitcoin with Protocol Labs, Cello, and Pocket, and really interested in exploring the different ways of capital allocation.
Well, we are here today to talk about deep funding, which is a new experiment that we've been cooking up. And I'm going to sit in the background as Sejal and Devansh ask Vitalik about deep funding and the inspiration behind it. So you all take the reins, and I'll take them back in about 15 or 20 minutes as we're wrapping up. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, that's great. I'll maybe start with the first question. So, Vitalik, this is like clearly something you've been thinking about for quite some time. So, I guess like what is the problem that caused you to start looking into it? What is the what is the mechanism itself, and why deep funding? Why the name?
Yeah. So to me, deep funding has two core insights that distinguish it from a lot of the previous like funding mechanisms, right? So one of them is deep in the sense of like a deep graph, and the other is deep in the sense of deep learning, right? So we can get into both of these, right? So when you say, the deep graph, right, the core of the mechanism is basically that you have this dependency graph. So this graph of projects and how much value each project provides to each other project. And this graph can have multiple levels to it. And the idea of moving from a frame of public goods funding to a frame of dependency graphs is something that I've observed in like commons and like public funding discourse, especially over the last year, right? And to me, the reason why like intuitively it should work is, or it should work better, is that like public goods funding in general has this problem of being this like fairly far mode thing, right? It's like, oh, you know, how much value does this thing provide to humanity, right? It's like, what is the dollar value that the Pi ECC Python library provides to humanity or provides to Ethereum? Like, how the hell do you even calculate that, right? But the question of how much credit does A deserve for B, or how, relatively speaking, how much more valuable is A for B than C is for B. Those are questions that are somewhat more tractable, right? And if you break down the relatively intractable thing into more tractable things, then you're going to be able to get higher quality answers, right? And there's like a lot of psychological research that shows that we're much more irrational at relatively far mode things. We're also more irrational about giving absolute numbers than at giving relative answers, right? It's like the famous scope and sensitivity question. Like if you ask people how many dollars they would pay to save 2,000 birds versus 200,000 birds versus 20,000 birds, it turns out the answer that they give is like $80 in all of those cases, right? And so, you wants to avoid like that kind of thing, right? And sometimes like public funding has a bad name precisely because it gets attached to these. Like very big challenges in even determining, like what is 1,000 times more valuable or 1,000 times less valuable, right? So breaking into graphs. The second part is like the deep learning part, right? So in my post on info finance, I have a section that's distilled human judgment. And the section there basically suggests like, hey, we have these powerful AIs. So how about we basically use AI as an accelerator, right? Like basically think of it as, you have an existing mechanism that is expensive, but that is credibly neutral and, or at least that has a lot of legitimacy and that you trust. And then you use AI to try to get something that is almost as good as that mechanism, but that can be extremely performant, right? And so think of it as like AIs being the engine and this human based mechanism being the steering wheel, right? And so the way this would work is that you fill in this graph, and then you would have a human mechanism that spot checks the graph in a few random places, and it basically gives out a final answer that is based on the AI given answers in proportion to how closely they match to human preferences on the specific subset that the humans actually checked, right? And so you can structure this in different ways. Like you could structure it as a prediction market where AIs are participating, or you could create a somewhat simpler structure. You can make an analogy to RLHF here, right? But like that's the core idea, right? Of like AI providing the scale, but then the some human mechanism that is more expensive per query, but where you make relatively few queries is the thing that is providing the direction.
Yeah, I'm curious if, what are the some unintended consequences of deep funding?
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is one of the things that we're going to find out, right? Because I think one of the new things that deep funding does is it does introduce this like contest nature to it, right? Where you have people using AIs that are providing and like these big, like million number, graph weightings that basically say, like this is the percent allocation going from this to this. And it's like a competitive mechanism, right? Like people are competing to give answers that are the closest to what the human jury ends up selecting. And like if you do a better job on the competition, then you get a bigger prize yourself, right? And like I think competitions like that, like very like structured competitions, they could give a lot of value, right? And like, I mean, when I was in high school, I participated in programming competitions quite a bit, and like they were really fun, and I enjoyed them, right? And like they can be great for really focusing attention, but at the same time, like any kind of mechanism has adversarial incentives in it, always has like unintended ways in which it's ends up breaking. So that's like one place where I would look for unintended consequences. Like if you want to ask the question of like where, if I was told a year from now that the mechanism broke, like where does it break? I would say, yeah, one of my answers would be, well, maybe it just turns out that even doing these like short range like spot checking answers questions of like how valuable is A for B, like maybe even those answers are actually like very hard for human beings to answer reliably enough. So that's a concern. Or potentially maybe, yeah, the problem of gaming becomes like just too hard to get past, right? And when you have AIs, people are going to start gaming the AIs, and of course, there's like very basic, like noob level stuff that you can do, like making 500 commits instead of 5 commits, right? But the theory is, of course, that like human spot checking judges are going to be able to see that and take that into account, and so that creates the incentive for people to make models that see it and that take into account, right? But then the question is like, is that whole balance actually going to work? And like, I don't know. That's something I would look for. I mean, otherwise, that question is it's definitely pretty open-ended. So, I mean, I'd also be interested to hear from, you three, like what are areas in which you expect unintended consequences might come?
I think the biggest danger might be in how software development itself is done. We've already seen maintainers come under a lot of stress after they tried sneaking in a backdoor vulnerability. So I'm
Mm.
concerned that it might lead to people not including dependencies or like kind of changing up their internal dynamics. I feel that's the thing I'm most concerned about.
Yeah, I think this is what I can think of. Like, will they end up choosing which dependency to use, which to not use,
Mm.
and how will that
Mm.
play out? So,
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mean, like if I had to rebut the standard rebuttal, it's like we're not comparing against Nirvana, we're comparing against the alternatives, right? And like in private markets, there's definitely a phenomenon where you choose which software you use, not just by the quality of the software, but by what terms they offer, and like whether or not like what their monetization strategy is. So it's like get it well, like, avoiding those kinds of, interactions is, definitely a crazy, hard problem. And, I mean, another area, of course, is, that to, like, mine for possible, like, places where stuff can fail is, like, peer-to-peer or, academic, peer review, and, citations and, citation rings and that sort of thing.
I think the next question is somewhat related, which is that we've seen cases of the government using AI models and it's gone very wrong. Like to give two examples, in Netherlands, the child welfare department used an algorithm and it denied benefits and asked for money back, and the prime minister stepped down. Um,
Mm.
so kind of, I wonder if like how is this
Mm.
mechanism different from some of the
Mhm.
existing initiatives that we've seen where governments are trying to use AI for filtering and eligibility and whatnot.
Okay, so this question is good because I think it gets to the core of part of the answer. Just has to be, yeah, not just the mechanism but also our expectations about the mechanism, right? And I think we generally, we have this political culture, possibly in the West, possibly globally, where like private is equated with risk taking, and public is equated with providing guarantees and providing certainty and providing procedural fairness. And like from a logical perspective, like those two axes definitely do not have to be coincide with each other, right? But like in our culture, if like Elon Musk, goes and does something and gives like $40,000 to one influencer and not another influencer, and like we have no idea what kind of manipulations happening in there, then like this is accepted. But then if a government denies instead of accepting, then that's treated as a bigger problem. I mean, I think welfare payments like specifically, right, are definitely something you want to be careful with, because like the goal of welfare is definitely, yeah, like fundamentally risk averse, right? Because the goal is to like make sure that people have enough for, healthcare and food and basic expenses. And like, you don't want welfare to look like startup returns, right? But if we're thinking of public goods funding, right, then that's not necessarily, yeah, a thing where we even want to try to optimize for like maximum stability and like maximum guarantee that like if you follow the rules then you're going to get things right. And I think there's even an argument that like precisely the thing that our civilization is missing is the opposite, right? Which is basically, yeah, this ability to potentially get really, yeah, lucky and get like a lot of reward and recognition for doing something super valuable. And so I think one part of the answer is like we needs to just be culturally more willing to accept more risk in public goods funding. And then another part of the answer, of course, is like the question of where we use it, right? And like there are people who want the form factor of getting like a stable tenure job, and there are people who want the form factor of go big or go home, and like there's people who have those preferences for psychological reasons, and then there's people who want that stability because they just are poor, have big families or medical conditions and things outside their control. And so I think like both preferences are valuable and there need to be things that serve both, right? And like we should also just accept that any individual mechanism is not meant to be this master mechanism that serves everybody, right? Like if you think about Protocol Guild, right? Like Protocol Guild feels much more tenure like, right? And Protocol Guild is not going to just go and suddenly deny your money because like a cosmic ray hit and a bit flipped in an LLM somewhere, right? And so I believe in having a diversity of mechanisms. I believe in having different mechanisms for different goals and different groups of people, and so the whole can be very like very diverse, very balanced, and very fair without like putting the responsibility of each on each individual part to shoulder that responsibility.
Yeah, love it. Go big or go home, for sure. I would love to know, like, what are some of the other use cases that you can see
Mm.
or think of for deep funding other than
Mm.
okay, software and
Mhm.
GitHub?
Yeah. Okay. So here we're so far we've been talking about like software development. One interesting use case could be art, right? So I think especially in the age of AI, art has very complicated dependency graphs, and like if you probably can do analysis to try to like at least probabilistically figure out like, oh, this piece of art was like actually 2.3% inspired by Game of Thrones that like somehow worked its way into some model and like total violation of copyright laws, but whatever, it's in there. And I think realistically, like you can't stop that, right? But if you can create a structure that does like an as good job as possible of like figuring out these incredibly complicated dependency and credit relationships in art and like trying to compensate people in different parts of that pipeline as much as possible, like I think that would be really cool. Then I mean, like the research and idea space, obviously. I mean, that's like an interesting one, right? Because it's like somewhat more illegible. Like if you think about the question of like who, invented AMMs, right? And if you go through the history, there's like a piece of the contribution that Haydn made, a piece of the contribution that I made, a piece of the contribution that Bancor people made, a piece that Martin Kopelman made, and then ultimately a piece that Robin Hanson made, right? And then each of those characters also have their own influences. But then, we see that AI is like actually very good at making the illegible legible, right? I famously have the example in my post earlier this year on the like draw a Bitcoiner versus draw an Ethereum. And like the Bitcoiner is this person who was like enjoying, like floating in a sea of gold coins. And the Ethereum is like wearing these cyber goggles and you have like blue and like neon lights and computers everywhere, right? So yeah, the idea generation as a good space. What other media even are there? EIPs are a challenging one, right? Because it's like you want to be careful about funding specific EIPs because you don't want to sort of corrupt the neutrality of the protocol process, and you don't want to like give people incentives to just keep like pushing things in. Like I think the ones that I mentioned are probably the big ones. I mean, are there any others that you guys can think of?
Yeah, I think one of the things we've been talking about is science as dependency. Probably we've covered that. Like, how we can, track that and have a citation graph and see what that would look like and if this is something that can be used for that. So we are super interested in seeing if that can work out.
Yep, I think the biggest challenge is the structured data because GitHub has
Mm,
it very nicely organized and the rest of the world doesn't. So I just think
mhm.
that's the challenge.
Yeah.
That's the hump we need to
Yes.
get over in applying it
Yes.
anywhere else. Yeah. I'll move on to the next question, which is How can people get involved in this pilot? It's a very new mechanism. So what are the different ways that people can start getting involved and actually contribute to making it a success?
Yeah. So the mechanism, right, as we've mentioned, it has two parts, right? It has the engine and the steering wheel. And I think the steering wheel basically is human judgment, making decisions about some like random spot checks of particular questions. And there's a lot of nuance in doing that steering wheel task well. And like the details of how that works, I'm sure will get figured out, over the next month or two. But this is the sort of thing that people that have been involved in like funding on chain and off chain before can totally get into. And then the other side of things is the engine part, right? Which is basically like the problem you're solving is you're given a graph. And your job is to basically fill the edges of the graph in with numbers from 0 to 1, such that the edges going into a particular node add up to a number that's less than 1, right? It's mathematically one of those very simple problem statements, right? But then the challenge is like, how do you do that in a way that actually lines up with this ground truth signal that you'll be getting from the spot checks. And I mean, to me, it's like the way to think of it is like it is a fun programming competition, right? It's that's basically what it is, right? You're like writing a bot to play a game. Like that's I did that when I was 16. It was really fun. And basically try your hand at this and it'll figure out how much you can do. So the prizes, we'll get. I'm sure that'll appear more in the doc, right? But one of the things is that like we'll split it into two categories where there's like a fairly programmatic prize for getting a high score, and then there is a kind of softer prize for just making public submissions that are useful and including useful to people interested in the mechanism, but also including useful to other contestants. So open interpretable models, like data visualizers, like tools help people train, tools that help people gather other pieces of information, like pretty much anything. And so there's, like both sides of that. Like, we definitely don't want this to be one of these sort of like fully, opaque competitions. So we're trying to encourage some collaboration too.
Yeah, I do think that's one of the biggest differences with the example I gave of government, where it's a fully opaque process. Only one person is developing a model, and that's too much power. And here it's like everyone is participating. And even if we mess up, we can be like, hey, sorry, like we did our best. Please tell us where and make a GitHub commit to improve, our process. So you're going to give more specific call to actions at deepfunding.org. And we really hope that we get a lot of submissions in the model. And like Vitalik has been very generous as well in kind of being the gardener who actually lays the ground and makes the soil fertile for this to happen. So we're really grateful to have your brain thinking on these issues.
There's going to be a Telegram group link on the website. So please join the Telegram and also refer people if you know people in your community, if you know academics, whoever who can submit models. So please refer to them and they can also participate.
So maybe a last fun question before we go. Do you have a favorite underdog public goods project that deep funding can uncover and support?
I mean, one example that I keep coming back to is that in one of the Optimism retro funding rounds, we funded Ketchak, right? So, like, literally the developers who actually invented the hash function that all of Ethereum sits on top of and uses today. And that's something that is like beyond, the cryptocurrency world, though it's obviously part of cryptography, right? And it's something that is very critical, right? But I think people doing that kind of cryptography that's like so base level, like even stretches far beyond the cryptocurrency world in value, like they need to be funded too. And I think it was amazing that we were able to, right? I mean, one of the things that I think you sent me, Devansh, was the famous internet meme of like software being this like very big tower of very different blocks where there's like one little piece that's maintained by some random guy in Nebraska, right? So I think things in that category are the kinds of things that I would be excited about unearthing and supporting.
Walkie, do you have any question?
Just want to end by thanking you all for being my ride or die group of mechanism designers and pilot designers here. So really excited about the program. And I want to thank Vitalik for being on the episode.
So one thing that I've personally felt while being part of this pilot, Devansh and I've discussed this, like the pace at which this is happening, right? So this is the speed that, the speed that we have experienced is incredible. So what do you suggest, like how we can, do this more, right, with other mechanisms? Because that is something that, we all recognize is needed, right? So would love to know your thoughts there.
Yeah, I think like what we need is, one is definitely, like some financial resources. Like I think in addition to, like funding rounds that where your goal is to fund a particular space, like we should just have more resources that go into funding experimental rounds where a bigger part of the purpose is like just getting experience around a particular round. But in addition to that, I think another piece is like really getting more intellectual capital involved, like actually creating things that people can be excited about and that wants to participate in and that can and contribute towards. And that's something where, like, I think this is theoretically one of the benefits of some of these, like more democratic and participatory mechanisms, right? It's like if you give a lever to a whole bunch of people to participate, then like that gets them involved, and that's also they end up being involved in like some of the other parts and in like the meta of improving the mechanism as well, right? So I think on top of just encouraging that, I think ecosystem wide, really talking more about funding as a first class thing is something that I want to be doing more of in 2025 as well.
Amazing. All right. This is going to be my second attempt to bring the episode to a close. Vitalik, thank you for joining us. Sejal Devansh, thank you for being my ride or die friends working on this pilot together. Very excited about public goods funding into 2025. Thanks everyone for your time. And we will see you at deepfunding.org. Welcome to our outro after the show with Vitalik Buterin, where we introduced deepfunding.org. Sejal Devansh, what did you all think of the episode with Vitalik?
I think like he covered such a breadth of topics that it's like, oh wow, this was only 15 minutes. Like, can't understand like how we covered like things from how the mechanism works, which he broke down as dependency graphs as being one element. And the second element was the spot checks. And I think that was useful. And then he moved on to how its applications to government and different mechanisms and art and industry. So I think like it's a pretty exciting new way. And I liked his reframing of public goods funding to dependency graphs, because a lot of people have felt that public goods funding is overused. So I think it's an exciting new direction to move into.
Yeah. I think for me, I definitely love the direction. I'm most excited about tapping into other communities which are just not Web3, so the AI communities, right? So I think that intersection is, we've already talked so much about it, we're seeing that wave in Web3, but bringing that crowd in is something that I'm really looking forward to, and making it so open, right? Like it's such an open market thing, and the contest, like anybody can come and submit the model without any gatekeeping. That is something that I'm also really looking forward to. And I'll be interested to explore, like how he said, we should discuss funding as a first class in ecosystems in next year. So definitely want to, with some of the work we're doing in Allo, and want to see how we can, continue doing that. And yeah, those are a few things that I'm really looking forward to.
Well, one of the things this kind of struck me that I just think is really cool. I've been in this game for 7 years, and what I see when I look back in time is an increase in velocity of mechanism design going to market. And I asked Vitalik to do this podcast about 2 weeks ago. And originally I was just going to interview him, do my annual yearly interview with Vitalik about what should public goods builders focus on. And I think within that 2 weeks, this deepfunding.org experiment has come together and really taken shape, and now we're announcing it, and it's going to happen, and it's this lean pilot. And I think the speed to market is the thing that is is sort of exciting to me about this here. If we can pull together something like this, taking Vitalik's mechanism design and like Gitcoin's resources for going to market, I think we're going to explore the design space in a really exciting way. So, deep funding itself is exciting, but I also want the audience to see the increasing pace of experimentation in the Web3 design space. I think we're starting to move in lockstep towards figuring out how to allocate public goods funding, and that's really exciting to me.
Yeah. And I think one thing I do want to mention that I've experienced like this network first approach that, we are exploring, like working with Devansh and even OSO Pairwise and all our other, partners, the way all of this has come together is incredible. And this speed can only be achieved, when we have this approach. So yeah, I just want to encourage everyone who has any idea, who wants to do anything, like we want to collaborate with you and we want to make it happen. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Just so the audience might not know what network first means, but basically at Gitcoin, we've been talking about how do we partner with our network of builders and mechanism designers to assemble resources on demand in order to manifest the pilot, as opposed to working with a centralized dev team that can only do one thing and has to sequence things in a roadmap. So the network first approach to building, I think, allows more fluidity in experiments that come together. And if you're an ecosystem that has a crazy idea, kind of like, Vitalik's idea for deep funding, then Gitcoin is here to work for you and to with you in rolling out that mechanism. So just a little bit more color on that network first direction that Gitcoin's moving in 2025.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think like what's been great about this is we've been able to work with organizations who spent their entire mission just thinking about this problem. So for example, Gitcoin has been thinking about mechanisms for a very long time. So they were like a great partner to build it with, and Sagel has been amazing at that. Open Source Observer has been looking at taking GitHub data and analyzing it and dependency graphs between code repos. So we've been able to work with them on the data layer. We've had we're hosting the competition on Kaggle, which is like a data science platform. So again, like they have the natural home for it and they have the entire infra ready. Pairwise has been looking at comparison voting, which we need for the spot check. So they've like already made so many mistakes, which we don't need to repeat if we want to build it from scratch. And finally, Drips, like how do we get funding to people who are working on GitHub if they don't have wallets and they can, and like Drips has managed to crack that, they can claim it whenever they want. So I think the advantage of a network first approach is really that you're working with people who've already spent their entire kind of work life thinking about that problem. And that has a lot of advantages in not repeating mistakes that have already happened.
I think that one of the things that Vitalik dropped in the podcast that I recorded with him, the part one, was talking about this idea of public good Legos. This idea that quadratic funding and the Sybil resistance upon it, which depends, and then retro funding, and then futurarchy, and then things like OSO that provide data, are all money Legos, but they're public goods money Legos. And it's in the permutations of combining all of these things together. I should mention Radical Drip, since you just said it, Superfluid, Giveth. I can't name drop everyone, but you know who you are out there. It's in the permutations of all the different things that you can assemble with these Legos that I think is going to support the accelerating pace of building in this space, because there's going to be so much off the shelf that you can do that you've never been able to do before. And I think that this ecosystem, because of the Legos that we can take off the shelf, if there's n Legos, there's n squared permutations of ways that you can put them together. And this means that if you're a hacker that wants to work on public goods funding in Web3, you can build more in a weekend than a centralized government was able to do with $100 million and an army of 1,000 civic software engineers 10 years ago. And so it's the accelerating pace, the exponential pace of innovation enabled by these Legos that I think it's really exciting. And pair that with a network first approach, I think that's how deep funding is going to come together and hopefully be a successful pilot. And hopefully we're going to accelerate our pluralistic exploration of this design space in 2025. So it's neat to come together. And I think that I'm just so thankful to Vitalik for providing the vision, and then also, some of the funding for pilots like this to boldly move the space forward. Well, we've only got a couple more minutes left. Should we talk at the object level about deepfunding.org and direct the audience's attention there? So deepfunding.org is the pilot experiment. And do we have dates for it yet? Do we know what people can see on the landing page now and what they will see when the pilot launches?
Yeah, I'm happy to take a first crack at the timeline that we worked on with Sagel. So we're going to be having the competition open on December 12th. And basically what you have on December 12th is the dependency graph without the weights. So you have 40,000 connections between different repos that make Ethereum what it is. So you have that graph and you have some data which Drips has got on the weighting of a subset of these of this graph. So you have something to get started and you have to like fill in the blanks. That's your challenge and that's your prompt which you have to build a model on. On Jan 20th, we'll be giving you some data from the jury. If you are building a deep learning solution for filling in the weights, you can use this data, which was released on Jan 20th, to actually train your model. And on Feb 20th, you'll be closing submissions. So, and then we'll use the jury data between Jan 20th and Feb 20th. That jury data is going to determine the winner. So that's kind of a rough timeline, and hope to announce the winners at Shelling Point in Denver. So that's going to be an exciting announcement. Yeah.
Yeah. And one more thing that I want to add, that we are also launching a primer series. The first session is on December 17th, which is going to be on Shapley values. So the idea is, we start getting into some of the academic papers which complement this pilot, because we also need a very strong foundation and depth of what we are building and what we are doing that is going to come from this. So, when you join the Telegram group link through the website, you'll get all the details about this primer series. So yeah, lots happening and lots coming up. So looking forward to having all of you in the group and working together.
All right, call to action time. If you are interested in getting involved in the deep funding ecosystem, go to deepfunding.org and check it out today. And if you're interested in having a custom mechanism built for your ecosystem, get in touch with myself, Sejal, or Devansh. And then any other call to actions as we're wrapping?
Come to Shelling Point in Denver.
Come to Shelling Point in Denver. Yep. Shellingpoint.gitcoin.co is where you can go to learn more about that. Well, Devansh, Sejal, thank you again for being my ride or die homies on this, and excited for the pilot. I am here for deepfunding.org, and we will see you after the episode. Peace.